Propofol took Michael Jackson's consciousness, slavery took his ancestors, bodily autonomy. 2 different centuries, different people, but the exact same nervous system message. Your body is not your own. Someone else decides what will happen to it. Hi, my name is Antonia, and today I'm going to make one of the most controversial videos that you have ever seen about Michael Jackson, about his life, about everything that the therapist sees that others didn't want you to see. So if you do not want to be triggered by this video, in all the ways I'm going to analyze Michael Jackson's brain patterns and his way of being, his trauma, his ancestry line, what he had done in his lifetime, then I advise you not to watch this video because it contains trigger warnings. If you had sexual trauma, we will talk about that, so I advise you in advance that some type of traumas will be explained. So if you do watch this video, you also need to know the fact that if I will say about something that was present in Michael Jackson's life and it was present in your ancestry line and you don't know about it, then you will find all the distractions not to watch the video. So be aware and be present when you're watching, when you're hearing. I know it's a long one, but I collected a lot of data because your nervous system, if it wants to distract you, it means that you had those patterns in your ancestry line and it wants you to not become more aware. So that being said, let's talk about Michael Jackson. So what if I told you that Michael Jackson's most controversial behaviors weren't psychological quirks, but an ancestral survival code playing out in real time in his life? Let me take you on a journey into the darkest corners of trauma history in America. Did you know that Michael Jackson's ancestors were slaves? So how could he become the millionaire that he was and the pop star from such a poor lineage? To understand this story, we must travel back 4 generations. Historically and statistically, American slave owners controlled, violated, and rewrote the bodily autonomy of enslaved people. I saw the documentary on MJ, and while I know the documentary was left open for comments, it is not true from a reality that involves a very precise nervous system. And in the documentary and in Michael Jackson's life, you could see his nervous system patterns from many perspectives. Now, since I am a pharmacist and I also became a psychotherapist and a neuroscience coach as well, I am researching and working quite a lot with the nervous system patterns, all of those that are repeating traumatically from the ancestry line up to the client's lifetime. And after I watched the documentary with Michael, I started researching his ancestral patterns because I wanted to know what was the truth there. If you never watched the documentary, this video will contain spoiler alerts. So for us to understand how Michael was thinking, how much trauma was stored in his emotional body and his nervous system, we have to go back to his childhood. And to see how his childhood was formed, we have to go back to his ancestors because it will be relevant in you understanding why Michael was the way it was, why he did the things he did. The Neverland, the weird relationship he had with children, and his fame and his vitiligo. I will be talking in this order during this episode. So Michael Jackson became one of our time's most famous artists, not because of pleasure, sadly, not because he just loved to sing, although he would have deserved to really enjoy what he was doing, but because his nervous system was beaten into performance and perfection. What do I mean by this? Let's see the blueprint of fear. To understand Michael's extreme isolation and weird way of being, we have to start looking at his paternal ancestry line. Julie Jack Gale was a Choctaw Indian. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. He was a Choctaw Indian who refused to be deported on the brutal Trail of Tears in 1830s. It was a forced march that killed over 2,500 Choctaw Indians through starvation and disease. And to survive this aftermath in the South, Julie became a U.S. Scout. Now, if you don't know what a U.S. Army Scout does, oh my god, his daily reality was military scouting, which meant operating miles ahead of the army, completely isolated in enemy territory where a single misplaced step meant death for him. He survived by forcing his brain into permanent 24/7 sensory perfection, watching everything in the outer reality. So what did MJ inherit to repeat unconsciously from this life threat? Generations later, Michael Jackson lived in the exact same psychological wasteland. He built fortresses around him, he wore masks in public, he operated under total paranoia. His nervous system was still running partially on Julie Gale's scout protocol: trust no one, stay hidden, and scan the horizon for predators. We now know how traumatic happenings and the way that our genes react to the environment will be passed down epigenetically. And I will show you during this whole episode, I will give you many situations so that you can understand that this is not random just for Michael Jackson. He is not just one case or the exception, and that we all indeed inherit our ancestors' fight or flight reactions. And as if it wasn't enough for poor Michael to inherit such a hard traumatic belief system of a US Army scout whose ancestors were Choctaw Indians who had to go through starvation and very ugly things, on the other side of his lineage was Millie Nero, a black woman born into the 19th century American slavery. So by that American law back then, Millie was chattel property, meaning her body was a financial commodity. It was subjected to absolute physical labor, systematic violence, and the constant threat of sexual exploitation. This is absolutely brutal and excruciating if you come to think about in what times did those people live. Even after emancipation in 1865, he faced the dawn of Jim Crow and anti-miscegenation laws. Because Julie was a Choctaw Indian and Millie was black, their relationship was actually illegal. If they wanted to be together, they had to live under the constant terror of racial violence and the Ku Klux Klan. Nighttime was not for sleeping, it was a time of terror where the sound of distant horse meant you grabbed the weapon and distinguished the lights. So Michael's ancestors, we can all agree that they lived in constant fear. Now, since everything that we have not healed or reprogrammed in our unconscious mind and soothed our nervous system when being triggered, all of those fears will be replayed by the descendants. That's why I'm telling you what happened with Michael's predecessors, and this is exactly why I chose Michael Jackson, because sadly, but we have many information on his ancestry lines, horrible happenings, and he kind of checks all the boxes to understanding why we also inherit trauma, and why does it matter for us to heal throughout our ancestry line, not just self-love, because if we don't, the result will be a kind of Michael Jackson and his life. So think about the fact how Michael's ancestors had an illegal relationship and they were constantly terrorized. So what was the modern replay in Michael's life? The historical lack of bodily autonomy is exactly what Michael recreated in many forms. His own body became a global commodity. He was managed and exploited by corporate executives and handlers, but it was one which started with his own father's severity. Because his father could never become famous and successful in music, every day after school he put the Jacksons to music rehearsals. When Michael wanted to actually be a child and protested against rehearsals, his father, Joe Jackson, reacted with brutal physical and emotional violence. Michael recalled crying as he watched children playing in a park across the street from the recording studio, forced to work instead. If any of the brothers missed a dance step, Joe would whip them with a leather belt, terrorizing them into compliance. So he whipped them. Now, why would the father be using whipping? Exactly, unless they redid the same circumstances that their ancestors survived. Whipping and watching while other American children were playing and they were put to work. Are you starting to see how what others do to us, all those circumstances, or what we do to them, bad things, it doesn't matter how many years ago happened, we will bring those things into the family by epigenetics. Psychologically, Joe Jackson was a narcissistic father who viewed his children not as human beings, but as an extension of his own ego. Having failed in his own ambition to become a successful boxer and a musician, Joe projected his frustrated desires onto all of his sons, transforming their home from a safe haven into a high-pressure corporate talent factory. It was transformed into the same slavery conditions that his ancestors had to survive. Michael's innocence was stolen from him because parental love was entirely conditional upon financial performance. While Joe Jackson was notoriously sadistic, regularly beating his children and mocking Michael's appearance, and they did the same with slaves 4 generations back. And this is public information. I am not making, sadly, anything up. I wish I was. Now, do you have any idea what kind of daily life does this mean for a child's nervous system that Michael went through? The abuse was overwhelmingly physical, verbal, financial, driven by a tyrannical control. However, the home environment was a devastational psychological split. His mother, Catherine, let's see how she was, because we inherit from both sides, right? Catherine enforced very strict religious purity as a Jehovah's Witness, while Joe physically abused her as well and subjected the children to a chaotic, hypersexualized environment on tour. Now, the reason why you will see that trauma being seen and experienced ulteriorly will be recreated by us unless we become self-aware and change the patterns. Now let's see what Michael did. I'm not sure many of Michael Jackson's fans know this, but this is one of the most shocking parts of Michael's life regarding trauma. When he was part of the Jackson 5, and this information is actually from Michael's brothers, Jermaine and Marlon's books and their interviews. So one of the most horrible life threats that Michael had to experience in childhood, and why his adult brain became so distorted, we have to look inside the crowded hotel rooms of the early Jackson 5 tours. Joe Jackson was a very ruthless and cheap manager, so to save money he crammed the boys, the entire band, into one room, mixing the older ones and the teenage brothers with the younger children, like Michael was younger and Marlon. So Joe viewed these tours as a personal adult playground. He regularly brought groupies, random women, into the boys' hotel rooms for wild, hypersexualized encounters, treating it as a rite of passage for his older sons, while completely overriding the boundaries of his children. Michael, being just a little boy, was given the terrifying command, "Play sleep." He was forced to put a blanket on his head, turn to the wall, freeze his body like a corpse, and pretend to be asleep, while adult sexual acts took place just inches away from him in the dark. If he moved, if he spoke, he faced his father's violent wrath. And again, just imagine these circumstances. This is something white people did to slaves as well, so it is highly likely that Joe already was repeating unconsciously a pattern of being in a little crowded room where slaves slept, and the American owners just went into those rooms, taking whoever they pleased, doing with them whatever they pleased, and having initiated even young children into their adult intimate life. It's the same circumstances that Michael's ancestors as little boys had to experience in slavery, only they were different characters. So repeating these circumstances very similarly to slavery times, but now Joe being in the place of those Americans who owned the slaves, this wasn't just uncomfortable, it was forced neurological freeze state. In Michael's developing brain as a child, sex became hardwired not with intimacy as a child, but associated with terror, darkness, and severe religious guilt enforced by his mother. Just to understand the human psyche better, Carl Jung, he was an amazing Swiss psychiatrist. He captured the exact trauma loop that Michael was going through again and again in his childhood through the concept of the shadow. Carl Jung explained that when an experience is too painful to see, to hear, to feel, and the mind cannot comprehend and resolve the trauma, then the psyche splits it off and buries it deep into the unconscious mind. However, this repressed material doesn't disappear. It runs like an automated program beneath the surface, meaning he will not be conscious of it. And I quote Carl Jung, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Because the psyche always seeks wholeness. To become whole again from fragments, it will continuously force you to gravitate towards the people who recreate the same situations or mirror those same situations that you were in. It forces us to replay, not to punish us, but to desperately give us a chance to finally look at what happened to the ancestors, to desperately give you a chance to finally look at, integrate, and heal what you had to disown to survive. What Carl Jung didn't know back then was that whatever was recreated as a mirror, we will recreate every circumstance remained unhealed from the ancestry line that your ancestors' nervous system experienced as dangerous and in fight or flight state, because epigenetically we can redo the same circumstances. And this is exactly why, sadly, Michael's adult psyche was indeed very fragmented. His chronic lifelong insomnia was a direct result of a nervous system remembering that the dark and the bad were unsafe and related to sexuality. And sadly, if you watch the documentary, spoiler alert, you will see his weird behavior with children, his room, how it looked, and the play sleep with sexual intercourse being in the room. It was replayed unconsciously by Michael Brains too. When he built Neverland and went with children into his bedroom, he was desperately trying to rewrite those filthy hotel rooms, attempting to create a pure, innocent sanctuary where no child had to hide under a blanket from sexual intercourse. But here comes the but part. The part that the documentary won't say. Because Michael Jackson's trauma was not integrated. You can see it even on your face. You can see it in his micro expressions. You can see in the way his brain worked. Because it wasn't integrated, it put him into an ancestral loop, which means that he will not only recreate the saving of the children, but also recreating the exact claustrophobic and sexually sick environment that his childhood self survived. If he would have integrated that trauma, if he could have had the capacity to do it, he wouldn't have taken children up until his bedroom at all, not even for sleeping. So whenever a child, just like Michael, had to repress his innocence because there was no room for being a child in childhood, in adulthood he was attracted to everything that he repressed, meaning to innocence. But sadly, this attraction was not a conscious one. It was not integrated. And this is the time, in worst cases, that someone can actually become a pedophile. And yes, I said it. So what we know now for sure so far, that even by sleeping on the same bed with other people's children, that was so far out of what psychology and trauma psychology ever would call normal. And when he saved those children, it was not a conscious act. It was a trauma-induced compulsion on his part, and I will let you see the cause of the fact of the rest that he did with the children because of unintegrated psyche. Plus, whatever we do not heal in ourselves and integrate from our ancestry line, we will recreate the same circumstances. Michael became just as white, just as rich, and just as traumatizing for others as was his father, or maybe in a lesser form. And those American people, those who kept his ancestors enslaved in their homes. I am not putting guilt on everybody before anyone thinks like that. This is a video who will give a lot of triggers to a lot of people. I'm absolutely aware of that. But after I will talk it through, I will tell you my reasons why I did this. So let's talk about the profound contrast between forced religious holiness and raw, violent adult content in the psyche. Just imagine, his mother was like the saint of the house. Everything is perfect, Jesus loves us, and daddy is having quite the time in the hotel rooms. Like, this becomes such a fractured psyche. To survive, Michael's mind had to deeply bury those wounded childhood selves, setting the stage for a biological time loop where, as an adult, his nervous system would desperately try to recreate and protect the innocence that he was never allowed to have. So Michael Jackson, he became the king of pop with the nervous system living in constant fear. And don't get me wrong, I know all the beautiful things he did. I know all the good that he did in the world. I know all the children that he helped. What you need to understand, not me, is that we live in a universe where the law of duality is a given. We cannot have in one situation just one side. In every situation and every person, we will have equal sides and measure of good and bad. Which means that unless integrated into oneness, Michael Jackson and all of us on earth, we will recreate in all of our lives the good that we are capable and as well the bad that we unconsciously redo from our hidden parts of our psyche and what our ancestors lived through. The only difference is that Michael Jackson was someone who had to integrate immense amount of trauma inherited from two different lines of Native Americans held in slavery. And let's see the biological blueprint of vitiligo as well by completing this video and understanding a huge thing. Every single disease we have can be tied directly to ancestral trauma. While it is a lot more complicated to understand because you need to have or a medical degree or you need to understand trauma and biology, psychology and biology on a medical level, I will tell you what happened in Michael's case and you will understand it. Many of you might know that he had something called vitiligo. Vitiligo is considered an autoimmune disease, a long-term skin condition where the patches of skin lose their color, turning milky white. And while this is medically absolutely true, what is also true is that vitiligo was never a random genetic mistake. In the medical field, during the formation of the 3 germ layers during gastrulation, we know now psychosomatically that the skin is the organ of contact. Where we are contacted, we are touched through. Contact is being formed through the skin. It's our biggest surface. And vitiligo is the biological response emotionally to a brutal, agonizing separation conflict. A trauma being violently torn away from your people, of your identity, of your innocence. So what happened 4 generations back? 4 generations prior, Michael's ancestors experienced the ultimate collective separation trauma, slavery. Enslaved people were systematically stripped of their names, their whole identity, families. Under slavery, white people owners routinely committed non-consensual sexual violence against enslaved African American people, creating a deep biological identity conflict, of deep trauma of who they are, and generational trauma within the descendants. The belief being that I am forcefully being separated from my own people, yet I am rejected by the white world and it oppresses me. To survive, I must blend in, I must become invisible. And I mean, this is such a deep, traumatic belief system that is passed down through so many people. So if you have vitiligo, like Michael did, or anyone that you know of, I dare you to start researching your ancestry line, and you will find that this information that I am sharing with you is absolutely true in that case for you too. Separation trauma from your people, them losing their identity, it doesn't mean they don't have to be African American. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that you were separated from your roots, from your people, from your identity. It could be through migration, needing to leave behind certain people from your tribe, and your ancestors maybe didn't want to leave them behind, but they had to. So being stripped from your nationality and surviving that way, all of these ancestral circumstances can cause in the descendant vitiligo. Generations later, Michael Jackson carried the exact unintegrated survival program in his DNA. As the king of pop, he was thrust into white-dominated corporate elite, completely separated from the reality of his roots. Simultaneously, his father Joe violently ripped away his childhood innocence. So when Michael's whole system experienced massive physical and emotional shock in 1984, his primitive reptilian brain activated this ancestral emergency program. So his immune system began literally to erase his dark skin because there was the ancient ancestral survival code. Dark skin is danger. To be safe, the authentic skin must disappear. His vitiligo was his body's desperate subconscious way to trying to bridge the gap between two worlds, solving a century-old conflict of forced separation and racial assimilation, at least partially trying. Because our bodies is clever, you guys. It always tries to heal us. I have been researching everything that I'm talking to you about for the past 18 years and studying so hard to understand these things and to understand trauma in the deepest way possible, even in physical diseases. And vitiligo patches actually become visible during the traumatic event when it's the active phase. So whenever the severe, brutal separation conflict has activated again, or it was triggered again, like being torn away from a loved one, or when Michael had to go on tour and maybe he couldn't stay with his mother as a child, even in the community, or having your identity stripped away. What happens biologically is the brain commands the cells to the epidermis to ulcerate and diminish. So the skin will lose its pigments, and this is when the white vitiligo patches will appear. Biologically, the skin is becoming sort of numb and pale to help the psyche dull the painful memory of separation, or to make the individual more invisible to a threat, sort of to say that the skin wants to come down to make me invisible. So when everybody in some way they resolve this separation conflict, when the brain registers that okay, the danger is gone, the separation conflict is gone, this is when the body knows this, and it will have a relief reaction, and it will induce healing and repairing phase. So in vitiligo's case, this healing phase is beginning the moment that the conflict is finally resolved, at least partially, or when the person feels safe again, or when the separation is completely accepted or integrated. The best case would be to be integrated, because then it doesn't have to appear again. If it isn't integrated, then you will re-experience the original traumatic event, or the vitiligo will worsen, just like Michael experienced it so many times. So what happens biologically when the separation trauma is at least partially resolved, when the brain lets go of this fight or flight, it will realize it, and it will stop destroying the pigment cells and begins the replenishing process. The ulcerated area of the skin starts to fill back up, which causes inflammation, redness, and itching, because it's healing. So the result will be that the body will try to color back. However, if the spots are completely white, repigmentation can be really slow, partial, or sometimes impossible without a massive shift in the nervous system. So the tragedy in Michael's loop, because Michael Jackson lived in the constant state of the global scrutiny and ongoing trauma, his nervous system was trapped in a trauma active phase. Every time a new lawsuit came, every time as a child he was taken away from his mother, or a child playtime, a media attack, or a stressful tour occurred, it acted as a trigger for him. His body never stayed in healing phase long enough to heal, which caused his vitiligo to expand aggressively. So his skin condition was, and his black skin was entirely overwritten, plus he used some creams to kill the remaining darker skin cells. So Michael Jackson's life was not a series of bizarre choices. Everything is logical. It was an ancestral and biological time loop. His body was simply speaking the unspoken language of his ancestors. I want to close this video, but I need to make something absolutely clear to everybody who's listening. Under no circumstance do I want to say that the king of pop was whatever meaning you are trying to give to what I just shared. Michael Jackson was an icon. He was an immense, unparalleled talent, and he will always remain an icon in my eyes, no matter what he did. For me, Earth Song and Giving to Me, those are my two favorites. I mean, come on, no words really. And quoting him, did you ever read the lyrics of his songs? Did you ever stop to notice all the blood we'd shed before? Did you ever stop to notice this crying earth, these weeping shores? What have we done to the world? Look what we've done. What about all the peace that you pledged to your only son? And as marvelous as Michael was, we need to be able to see a human as a whole person. Not just that he was just good or just bad. If he can sing the Earth Song the way that he can, that means that he cannot do bad things. No. If we think about this way, about anyone, not Michael, anyone, we are not living in reality. In reality, people have altered states of consciousness, and they are altered sometimes in unstable ways. And it can be when you least expect it, because it is epigenetic expression that can change the traumatic event. So even when a Joe or a Michael can redo the harm that was done to their own ancestors, if they would have known this, they would have had probably, or not necessarily, but they could have had the consciousness and the awareness to rethink it. So what I shared in this video, what is psychologically true for trauma and for what I shared about him, it is important to understand, because this is our reality as humans. And I honestly believe that after his death, Michael was supposed to become a beautiful example why we need to change and raise our consciousness. Whatever he experienced, some people experience it too. Some of us experience it in lighter form. Some of us experience it just the same way as he did. Fame and money can cover a lot of things, but they cannot hide the truth for the future of us, not anymore. If we as humans, we want to evolve from wars, from psychological enslavement, and from the deep emotional and physical sickness that people are currently suffering from, without fully understanding why we won't be able to. We must learn to do something incredibly difficult. We must learn how to hold dichotomies. What does it mean for a nervous system to hold dichotomies? It means to have the capacity to hold two conflicting truths at once without dropping into judgment or into triggering, without being triggered by either side. It means looking at Michael Jackson and saying that he was a freaking creative genius of monumental proportions. This is the beautiful side of the man. But he was also severely traumatized, fractured human being who covered his compulsive mistakes through fame. When your nervous system cannot hold the dichotomy, true opposite truths at once, it means that your own nervous system will be going into black or white thinking, either one, either the other. It either completely blindly idolizes someone, puts them on a pedestal, like many people did with Michael, or they demonize the man or anybody else. If we have black or white thinking, that is not true self-awareness and integration. Integration of the psyche, healing, can only happen when the nervous system expands enough to hold the light and the shadow together. As Carl Jung taught, that expansion is what will allow the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain, the site of our highest consciousness, of our awareness, to stay online and heal, to rethink, oh my God, what did I do? Was that okay? This is just the prefrontal cortex. And this is not a joke, you guys. People are sick mentally, emotionally, physically, because they are running away from these hidden ancestral scripts. And because we do not know collectively that we have to take ancestral script into consideration when healing. I did a video back in Marilyn Monroe as well, and you can write me in the comments whose generational patterns do you want me to analyze next. Just make sure that there's enough data of that person. I am sharing this through people's examples, the time through Michael's example, to show you why we suffer as humanity and what are the devastating consequences of not integrating and healing the psyche. In Michael's case, and I am not judging him, I know under that level of crushing pressure he simply did not have the physical capacity in his prefrontal cortex to make a different or a better decision. His brain was hijacked already on autopilot, and I don't believe that he could have gotten better help than what he got, because he was carrying some of the most horrible and claustrophobic ancestral traumas that I have ever heard in a lineage, and I work with this daily with my clients on these exact themes. And I am not pouring out my heart here today to criticize a legend. I am showing you that if the king of pop with all his billions and global adoration could not escape the invisible prison of his DNA, what makes you think that you can escape yours by ignoring it? The ancestral loops stop when we have the courage to look at the truth, hold the dichotomy that we are not just good or just bad, that we are human, and finally we have to do the work to integrate. If you listen to the lyrics of Michael's songs, it will hit differently knowing of this video, and you will see what I talked about because his feelings are there. So we have to stop the ancestral loops, each and every one of us, because this is why Michael wanted propofol at the end of his life, a very powerful anesthetic that ultimately killed him. General trauma is not a ghost story. It is a biological survival code that will give you a lot of information. It will dictate how you sleep, what you eat, who are you falling in love with. You think it's attraction. No, 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 no. You are redoing exactly what your ancestors redid. If you want to become truly successful and not sabotage your own healing, we need to learn about this. So if you really want to learn how to decode these invisible family scripts inside your own nervous system and finally step out the ancestral loop, subscribe to this channel. You can book a consultation with me. You have the website here. If anything is bothering you, anything, I mean anything, we can heal anything. So if you are interested, come to one of my live workshops in Vienna or Budapest, or write me an email and my team will give you the details. Thank you for your attention. See you next time.